You're listening to Orbital in Conversation, interviews and discussion from Orbital Comics in central London with your host, Chris Thompson. You can find us online at orbitalcomics.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe via iTunes. Send all your comments, suggestions, and questions to Chris at orbitalcomics.com. Hello and welcome to episode 120 of Orbital in Conversation. I'm Chris Thompson and I am back here again with Carl
Snarl.
Snarl?
Yeah.
I was going to go
Snarl.
AKA
No.
Charlie, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know.
That was last
then.
week. Yeah.
That was then. This is now. I'm Carl Snarl. I'm fresh from the Beastwagon tour.
Of course. Yeah.
We've been touring all of the rat holes of London lately.
I guess to give an extra plug, you know, there is the fact that the Beastwagon exhibition is still on here at the store. And in fact, you, in a sense, are one of the Kickstarter rewards, or at least your music.
I sure am.
So we were chatting last
Week.
time. It wasn't quite last week, because actually these have come out close together. These are kind of the sister Angoulême shows as such.
Yeah,
but next week, if all goes according to plan, then there will be an interview with Owen Johnson and John Pearson, who are behind Beastwagon.
Yeah.
So all this preamble and build-up that we've been giving, you'll start to get a bit of a payoff.
Well, yeah. I had to be there the whole time.
You did, yeah. And, you know,
great.
if you back the Kickstarter, you can kind of have a piece of Carl almost. So to
Piece
speak.
of my mind.
But anyway, so this is the follow-up to our Angoulême special. Hopefully you had a chance to listen to that and to kind of live vicariously through us and have all this inspiration to want your own palette cleanse in the new year, 2016, and try and make your own trip there. But I was able to do some interviews there, as well as talk to some people afterwards. So you would have heard me speak with Paul Gravett after the fact and what he thought of it. But one of the friends I caught up with there and didn't get to mention was Julie Marot, who did the wonderful Blue is the Warmest Colour. And Scandalon, she did a talk and a signing here at the shop. We pretty much love her here. She's fantastic.
She loved our tiger.
She did. She loved the wonderful soft toy
I have to try
tiger
and find some pictures of Julie and the tiger because they were cool.
They were amazing. And, you know, she was so busy at Angoulême. She had a new book called City and Gender, but we managed to catch up for a few minutes and just hang out. And she wanted to introduce me to her friend, Georgia Weber, who is actually a Canadian creator, did a thing called the Dumb Project, which is far from being dumb. It's actually about her experience with losing her voice. And although Georgia and I didn't catch up in Angoulême, we caught up in London the week after. So on this show, you can get to hear Georgia and I just chatting here at the shop. She had enough of her voice back for us to be able to do that, which was fantastic.
Useful.
Plus, as we had mentioned about Le Nouveau Monde, the New World tent there, and knowing various people and compatriots, Tom and Simon, who used to work here at the store and who now run the Publisher Breakdown Press, were there with their own table for the first time. And so I decided to check back in with them briefly and see how they were. So on this show, you can hear both Georgia and then the guys from Breakdown talking about their work, and that gives you a broader scope of our Angoulême this year.
Wonderful.
Okay, so I'm here with Georgia Weber, who has done the Dumb Project. So we were put together by a mutual friend, Julie Marot, who obviously is a fan of your work. So I guess before we start talking about that, how was it that you and Julie came into contact?
Mostly through mutual friends. Like, Julie had made friends with some people who had done the residency in Angoulême. So small town, obviously, everyone gets to know each other pretty well. And then when they came back to Canada, and I was living in Montreal at the time, she came to visit, and she visited our studio. And yeah, we just spent some time together.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And so, going back to the beginning for you, how and when did comics first start out? Like, you know, what are your earliest memories of it, and how were you engaging? Was it creating or consuming?
100% consuming at the beginning, and it was really a sort of odd discovery for me, because I guess I read Archie comics like most people did, you know, bugging their parents at gas stations to buy them things because they're bored in car rides, which never actually really affected me very much. I really didn't think about Archie comics at all. But in high school, so I grew up on Toronto Island, and what it means is ferry rides back and forth between Toronto and your house. And so it's not convenient if you have appointments that are separate, like say an appointment at 4 in the afternoon and then another one at 7 p.m. Like you can't go home in between them. And I was, you know, mostly going sort of across the city but through downtown, where I'd stop if I was on my way somewhere and I had like an hour to kill. I'd stop and I'd go into like a Chapters or an Indigo, just a massive bookstore where I knew no one would care that I was there, and go into the comic section to find Calvin and Hobbes and just to sit and read Calvin and Hobbes for the entirety of the time I had to wait. And I just would do this like it was entirely just me by myself. And I think the first time I discovered it was just that I was in a bookstore because I love books, and that was like a nice way to pass the time. And then walking through and just finding my way towards these newspaper comics. And then, yeah, for whatever, I don't even remember reading any other book. It might have even been like the first book I picked up off the shelf happened to be Calvin and Hobbes, which happens to be brilliant. So I just ended up absorbing it and being absorbed, and I sought it out at every opportunity after that. So like that's the first time I was really engaging with it, other than just passively reading in a sort of bored way.
So then when you engaged with it like that, did you suddenly go, I want to do something with this. I actually want to participate as opposed to just consume, or was that a later kind of discovery?
Much later, yeah. No, I wasn't interested. I had no, like... I guess the strip seemed more like something that just existed perfectly. There was no sense of like, oh, I have an idea that could be better than this, or like, I have a place to take this that it's not already going. It was just doing everything so beautifully. And I totally adored it. Like, it got to a point where I was, you know, I bought as many of the books as possible, and then I was, like, photocopying them and cutting them out, putting them on my walls, and, like, just loving them completely, but never having the sense of wanting to do it or being able to. Like, it just didn't occur to me somehow. Yeah.
So what were you actually planning or wanting to do at that stage then? What was your idea?
I guess I was in high school. I was going to be a musician. Yeah, because the school that I went to was arts focused, and music was sort of the most, I guess, like the sexiest of all of the things that you could do. Yeah. Also because when I started there, I was taking drawing classes. Like, I assumed I would, because I've been drawing since I was a kid, just like obsessively and nonstop. But as soon as I got there and had to go through like being graded for it and like the exercises they wanted me to do, it just like totally drained it of all joy, and I stopped doing it and kind of just thought like, well, if that's what being an artist is, then I don't want to do it. And then music was the next best thing, and I had a lot of friends doing that, so it was pretty easy just to be staying with them.
And so how did actually doing comics come about then? Like, was it all related to the Dumb project then, or, you know, had you already started before that? What's kind of the timeline there? Yeah, I had a very scattered timeline, in that, yeah, I gave up on visual art. It never occurred to me that comics would be something I would do. I didn't really know anything about comics besides the newspaper and then the Calvin and Hobbes obsession that I had. And so I ended up in a non-traditional art class in my last year, which was just a creation of one of the teachers there who was interested in contemporary art and not just teaching people how to draw or paint. So we had a unit on comics that was amongst others like sculpture and architecture and just like all kinds of things, digital art. Like, he really kind of gave us a little sample of everything. And then when we did the comics unit, we would always do a bit of a lecture before just to get some examples of what could be done. But I recall thinking that they were all very serious stories, because this is around the time when the like graphic novel term was coming up big. And I think he probably even called the unit graphic novel unit or something. I don't know, maybe it was comics, I don't remember. But I just remember being so intimidated, and then telling my boyfriend at the time, who was older than me, like, I'm so intimidated by this. And he showed me a Julie Doucet comic that
was just a dream of hers or something. And it was just like reading that one comic, very short, at the beginning of My Most Secret Desire, that sort of clicked, that I was like, oh no, like there are these serious stories, but also comics can be literally anything. Like, there is no convention I have to assign myself to. I don't have to like go through a bunch of classical training to get to a place where I'm actually allowed to express myself. It was just like, I can just draw and make jokes, and that's great. Not that my jokes were ever very good, but I ended up taking that project in the unit and expanded it to become my year-end project because I just wanted to keep doing them so badly. And through that, met another teacher in the school who was just a real comics fan and had applied a lot of his academic knowledge or his academic way of understanding things to comics just for himself. And then when I was talking to him about wanting to study them and how there was this lack of programming in universities and I didn't know what I was going to do next year, he proposed an independent study course for me to come back and do a 5th year of high school, basically just with him, like meeting him a couple times a week and talking about comics, and then he would give me some that I had to make for assignments, which was probably like the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. It even took me a while to remember that all of that happened, because then after that I sort of dove into publishing people, just wanting to give them a sort of similar like supportive experience of like discussing the nature of comics and looking at process work in a way that was not like more interested in bettering the work itself and in like letting people sort of come in and try new things. And so I put myself into this position of like facilitating other people working, and I kind of stopped working myself. So there's a good like 5-year gap where I was just not making any comics. Yeah, and I also stopped making that zine about 2 years after starting it. So there was another 3 years where I was just working in like literature and publishing, and I moved to Montreal, and I was just like sort of pining after it, but totally afraid of it. And then it was only the sort of urgency and the extremity of the situation with my voice that made me think like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do this. So yeah, it's a weird path, like intense at moments and then big spaces of nothing.
Well, what kind of gave you that anxiety? Like, what was it that made you stop? Was it the fact that you were trying to facilitate others and you're seeing them come through and you're like, oh my god, these people are so good? Or was it the kind of things that your teacher was giving you where you're just going, I can never measure up to this? What contributed to that feeling?
A little more the second one there, like after having studied like what all really goes into comics, and particularly coming from looking at Bill Watterson, who's doing so many things, and with this very like broad perspective and like these criticisms and observations about life in general, and always with like humor and such touching relationships. Like, it was definitely just being incredibly intimidated by that. Partly because I guess I am one for analysis and I am one for seeing a bigger picture, and so I couldn't like narrow my mind into the focus of like just actually putting something down. It was like every line that I might attempt was like not gonna live up because I was considering too many things at once as the potential of the medium. And it was very exciting, but also just like, I guess I've never had much patience for like becoming good at things, and really felt like I had to be, because any story I would tell, I could do it badly, or I could do it with like less talent artistically and it would be fine. But then if I had really refined that skill, it would obviously be like, 100 times more powerful. And I felt bad. It sounds really bizarre as I'm saying it. Like, I felt bad for not serving the story in the best way possible. I felt like I would always have to be refining in order to be able to do better. So like the things that I drew for that, even as I drew them, because I did submit a couple of things to my own publication, just sometimes there'd be a writer who wanted to work on something and I'd draw it for them, or like I had one idea for just like a single page thing, so I'd draw it. But it was always me just like choking back this like horrible disdain for my own work, for my own lack of ability. So even when I did it, it felt bad. And that would stop me from doing it. Like anything that's not fun and that's not like pushing me into new interesting creative corners of my mind, like I'm, naturally gonna want to not do it. So that was tough. I even got that advice from people being like, if you're not enjoying this, then why are you doing it? And I kind of took that to heart. even though that was true, you know, it's also kind of a short-sighted thing. It's like when people tell you if you're not good at something, you shouldn't do it. It's like, well, actually, it's the opposite of what you should do. You should do more of that thing because you need to get comfortable and find your way through it. And that's like how people grow. So, you know, I loved the thing and was afraid of it. And I'm glad that I came back around and had to go through that, like, getting over myself process. Though maybe, you know, at 18 I wasn't ready for it. At whatever age I was in 2012. At 23 I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you one of those people that holds yourself to high standards, but not necessarily other people? Not that you let people off the hook, but you're kind of going, I've got to be perfect or I can't put it out there, but maybe you're more lenient on others. And the reason I ask is because obviously you were publishing other people's work for a couple of years, which I'm sure was great. But it must have been quite an interesting quandary because, you know, you're going, oh, my stuff's not good enough. Do you give people a bit more of a pass, or actually did you stop publishing altogether because you're like, none of it's good enough?
No, never that. Absolutely not. And I mean, that's the thing, like, at the time, yes, at the time what you're saying, all of that is true. I was just like seeing what other people were doing, and I mean, I could obviously recognize the people who were more practiced with their technical ability and people who were less practiced, but the whole point of it was to say, like, every part of this is part of your process of getting somewhere, and it's not less valuable. So, you know, yeah, I was really ushering them in and then, like, holding myself back. But now, not at all. I'm not a perfectionist by any means. I have high standards when it comes to publishing. Not my own content as much, but like the ways in which I'm unforgiving in my publishing are like the design of my books and the way that I put them out there and like the intent behind different choices and watching like color consistencies and stuff. Like, I'm ruthless that way. But when it comes to the art itself, like, I know when it's done. I don't know. I just, I guess I'm just more comfortable with my abilities now. Not that they've advanced to that place that I feel they're actually, you know, doing the art or doing the story the best service they can. For me right now, that is the best I can do, but I'm not gonna hold back until I'm at some idea of perfection that just clearly doesn't exist. Like, yeah, and I mean, if it stopped being challenging for me to produce those things, then there would really be no point in doing it anyway. So
right. So was it then your experience with losing your voice essentially that motivated you to start again? That brought that to happen?
Yes, but I was already on that path.
Okay.
You know, it was basically a few months earlier that I had decided, I decided to try university for the first time ever. And it was because in Montreal, once you become a resident after you've lived in the city for a year, or lived in the province, in fact, for a year, you gain resident status, which then entitles you to an enormous subsidy and your university funding from the government. So it was so cheap, I figured I might as well try, and had some notions about like continuing my career in literary publishing and thinking like I should probably be, you know, putting some marketing classes under my belt and like getting my French down better. And it was halfway through that one semester that I took of classes that I realized I didn't give a shit about any of the things I was studying, and that if I was going to spend my time on anything, it was not even going to be literature anymore. I really wanted it to be comics. Which was horrifying, but also so liberating, because there's a big part of me that had just been like crying out for that for so long, and I was suppressing and suppressing. And
was it like coming out?
Like I guess just like, okay, yes, this is who I am. I need to do this. And then like set about for that summer trying to sort of force myself into habits of like, of like drawing a little bit every day, or like trying to come up with stories and actually finishing them, and character design and stuff. But I hated it. I actually hated that too. The process was just so aimless, and like really did feel that I was shooting for some idea of perfection or of like being good at it. And I had lots of friends at the time. I was super lucky to have already discovered TCAF many years before, and been meeting people every year who are just, you know, have been incredibly important to like facilitating this for me, and who were so supportive and encouraging even of those things I was making. But I really didn't get over the fear of it until my voice really became this urgent priority, and I realized like okay, if, like, this is a story I absolutely need to tell. It hits a lot of really important points for me. It's a personal story, so I'm only talking from my own perspective. I'm not, like, trying to jump into someone else's head and imagine what their life might be like. I don't have to do character design because it's me. And I happen to also wear a lot of the sort of same types of things all the time, so I have sort of iconic items that are very easy to, like, simplify into a character. And then it's just this wealth of experiences that were, like, flooding at me, and so I wasn't ever at a loss for material. And, like, only then did I realize that what had been missing the entire time, and what's always been missing for me in art that's either given to me in instruction or in some moment where I'm, like, thinking about what the idea of being an artist is as opposed to making something, is that, like, I have many real problems with the world that make living in it, like, just sort of a constant tension. And so if I'm going to do something, it's always with that tension or overcoming that tension, which is very difficult. And it's got to be so compelling that I'll do it. Like, it's got to be such an incredible force that I need to get this done, that I can, like, really get over every insecurity I have, get over all the ridiculous dichotomies and contradictions, and just just try to say the thing as best I can. So, I mean, Den was extremely liberating for me in that way, because once I got into a rhythm of it, and that took a while, that took, like, a few months, once I got into a rhythm of knowing that, like, that was a good practice for me, it just, stripped away a lot of the anxiety around it, and like, motivation's not a problem for me with regards to this comic. I'm, like, really excited to get it done. I'm really excited to get the next thing going, because I'm saying something that I think has value to more people than just me. Yeah. So,
well, and just to give context to those who are listening and possibly haven't seen the book before, can you kind of give us the rundown of what happened? Because this is all based on your own experience, so without spoiling where they don't have to read it anymore. Yeah. What is kind of the basis for it?
What
is Dumb about?
Yeah, it's about an injury that I sustained to my voice, which, isn't... If you want, like, a further explanation than that, I can't really give it to you, and no one's ever really been able to give me one, which basically made it extremely painful to talk. More so, the more I did it, it just kind of built up into this point where I was in pain all the time, even when I wasn't speaking. And when I was, like, it was a totally different pain, something I've never experienced before. And
I feel really guilty right now. So.
Yeah, you should. No, I'm totally okay. Like, I still have limitations, but I do this freely. And so, yeah, I did take some drastic action to try to heal myself more quickly than I was told I would be healing, mostly because the pain was so unbearable, and I wanted to get back to my regular life as quickly as I could. So I stopped talking almost entirely for a few months, basically thinking, I'll just do this until it stops hurting, and then, several months later, it was like, it still hurts. I'm not even talking, and it's still very painful. So, I did everything one does in this situation, visiting doctors and all sorts of alternative healers, and going to therapy, and all the things that people got to do. Yeah, so going to just see, like, who could help me in every way that was possible, but also, like, trying to maintain some kind of life at the same time. I just had, like, a huge amount of spare time because I had to stop working, and I couldn't talk to my friends, and being with them wasn't a problem, but it certainly took more energy than it did before, so I spent a lot more time alone than I ever had, which also was something I actually just needed. My personality is very social, and so I would avoid being alone before that. And so obviously this was a very, like, intense period of change, and right from the start was very clearly this story that, it was like, I have the time to do it, I have all of the pieces of the puzzle that I think I need, all it is sitting down and actually getting it done, and there's no excuse not to. So yeah, that's how that happened.
And so where, I guess, can we talk about where you're at with it now, because you're
my voice,
you're able to talk. I mean, is this hurting you now, or have you learned to adjust to it? How do you deal with it at this stage? It's
a little bit of a mystery to me at this point. I know that it's somewhat related to stress, but not always, not every kind of stress. It seems to be, like, only particular levels of stress that I'll see a direct impact. But without one of those circumstances coming up, I can talk mostly normally as long as I'm very conscious to take breaks. So I could spend a whole day around people and talking to them as long as I get like an hour every couple of hours to really just not talk. And that could be in the form of just listening to someone else talk, or watching a movie, or like sitting together and working on something where we're kind of each in our own little worlds. Like, it can be incorporated, it can be integrated into my life. But there's also definitely times where I will not go out to a loud place. I will, put my lipstick on if I have to and just kind of write to people and go back into that mode. Or if for whatever reason my stresses are in such a way that I do actually need to continue like a somewhat active day without my voice, then I just go back to the old ways. Right. So it's very, very intermittent, and that is, especially for people in Toronto who have only known about this sort of after the fact, because I moved partway through the recovery, is very confusing to some people to see me talking one day and not the next. And I still get many people just being like, laryngitis, it's the worst. I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about, but that's fine. If you have, good intentions, it's totally okay. But I still get every response that I ever did to it being gone. So
I guess you're talking about or touched on a bit of sort of your process and coping mechanisms and things that you did, and I want to ask about that in a minute. But at first, did you go through the typical kind of 5 stages of grief and loss with it? Like, do you remember actually being able to go, there were times where you were bargaining and this and that? Does that kind of correlate to what you were going through?
No, I did the opposite of that, actually, which, is really not... I'm trying to make it clear in the comics. I don't think it's coming through, but that's okay. Can't do everything. And actually, at the time that my stress-related injury happened, I was the least stressed I've ever been in my entire life. And for the several months leading up, I was experiencing sort of like an awakening of sorts out of, like, it was maybe the first time in my entire life that I haven't been crippled by depression and anxiety, and it was such a relief. It was so wonderful. But it did mean that when this pain started to happen, I was sort of pushing through it, thinking like, optimist, everything's gonna be fine. Like, it hurts, but like, people get sore throats all the time, and so mine's lasting a little longer. Like, it'll be okay. I just have to maybe slow down a bit. And then I'd forget and go out drinking with people and talk too much. And so actually, but at the time that it happened, when I was like, I really need to take this seriously now, I still felt really good. I was just like, okay, and I cried for a little bit, just feeling this. I really felt a period of mourning, but it was only 2 or 3 days, and I sort of told myself, like, 2 or 3 days is fine. You can be sad about this for 2 or 3 days, but, it was like Monday or something, and I was like, Thursday, let's do something about this. And, like, just kind of set out, like, okay, I don't talk anymore. I started telling people my situation. I took a couple days to, like, inform a few key people in my life that I, like, used my voice very painfully to describe the whole thing, and then said, hey, from now on, this is the deal. So I felt really great at the beginning, and I was totally happy to be adjusting, and then it got worse as time went on because I got more and more confused as to why nothing had changed. And the fact of no doctor I saw really having like a good or serious answer for me, and no one offering me treatment for the first 2 months. I literally just waited for 2 months to hear from anyone. And that's just scary. Like, it got, I'd have just like rough moments of like, wow, I can't believe that I'm really still just waiting for a phone call. And like other stressful things taking place, I guess they just really built up over time. And that feeling of like, this is endless and I'm alone. There's no other person in this experience with me. Those two things really got to me. And, not to spoil anything, but like that will be reflected in the later issues of the comic.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think all of that has come across, but we're talking about an incomplete work at the moment, in that it's a work in progress. So I've read 5 issues. I think you're something like, I was reading 12 pages into issue 6, possibly more. Since
I'm like 12 pages into issue 8.
There we go. Yeah. Okay, so I've
They're
read.
not printed yet, though, so people can't. Yeah, you can't read them.
Yeah, so we can only speak about in the context of what I've seen, for example. Whereas you see the bigger picture, and I'm sure as the complete work, it'll reflect what you're going through.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Now, what was really interesting was you talked about the sort of, not coping mechanism, but something that you used as part of your process, which was the lipstick.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll paraphrase that, and then you can correct me if
Yeah,
I'm
that's
wrong.
okay.
But essentially, you... there's a lot about it in the comic, and it's great. But you would use the lipstick when you had that on because people would read lips, and I guess it would draw attention. And it does. I guess it gives an outline to lips, actually, to concentrate, because not everyone's practiced at reading lips, but certainly as your friends, they would want to be,
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
be making an effort.
Yeah, and that was a code because the silence part of my recovery is not constant. Like at the beginning it was almost constant, but I would still talk very occasionally to people, mostly just like a friend that I invited into my apartment where I knew it was quiet and I knew I only had a short amount of time, because I didn't want to confuse people who would see me talking at once and then 10 minutes later I'd be like, no, I can't speak to you right now. I definitely had at least one experience where someone was just very insulted. They thought I was like pulling a joke on them, and so the lipstick is a code, and I don't wear it unless I'm not speaking. It's my way to tell you in just a glance, like, this is the situation today, and I still use it. Kind of sucks because I used to get to wear lipstick every day, and now I only wear it like once a day, probably once or twice a week for a few hours if I have to be out and I can't just hide in my house, but it's a bummer. I really like it. I actually chose it at the time because I was like, I would love to wear lipstick every day. Like, might as well, use this as a code. It's very easy, and it just like kind of made me feel good. So
it was more than just being something that could show, or give people a focus to lip read. It was actually more a code, like, I just can't speak today.
Yeah, no, it's very much directly saying, like, if you see me and I'm wearing lipstick, I will not speak to you. It doesn't mean I won't communicate with you. I just won't use my voice.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, and what was interesting, and you definitely touch on this in the comic, is it brings up all these ideas of gender and identity. Because obviously, losing your voice, you're suddenly, well, who am I if I can't speak, and people can't understand me, and I can't communicate? Am I losing myself? Am I losing my friends, etc.? But that whole thing of lipstick, and there's sort of a scene with you putting it on and then wiping it off, and just being unsure, I guess. And there's all these feminine stereotypes. How much of a process was that for you to go through and adjusting to that and finding your place as, I guess, both a feminist and also in your situation?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long a process, but it was interesting to notice for myself that, like, the decision and the anxiety about it came up because I had sort of been unsure as to whether or not I identified as a feminist because I didn't know really what it meant. Like, I had the vague concept of, like, it's about equality for women, but then obviously there are so many cues in the world saying that, like, that's a bad thing to be. And so actually had to use this because I was like, I'm just not comfortable, like, not knowing what the implications of this are. I would rather be making this decision informed than, hoping and guessing that I'm in the right place, which is basically how I was living before that. And I'm quite happy that I had this opportunity, and that I had enough, like, follow through to actually do it, to sit with these ideas and read a little bit and decide very firmly within myself, like, no, this is what I believe, and then how does this circumstance apply? How is it supported? And the conclusion that I came to was just doing things that are the best for me, regardless of the context, is always going to be a feminist act. Not deciding to go with what someone else might think and what someone else might then put on me from their own experience. That in itself is feminism. And then, having other thoughts of those things, like actually considering the fact that, like, I have to be aware that I may get more male attention from misogynist men who really want a silent woman around who's just pretty and doesn't say too much, and smiles at them and, like, is just a sort of arm piece. Like, I'm happy that I have the moment to be like, I'm going to be aware of that and, like, avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah. So we were talking a bit about your process, I guess, as far as what you were doing to interact with people, send codes, send signals, let them know where you were at. In terms of your other process and stuff, what's kind of interesting, like we've both come back from the Angoulême festival, and you talked about your Calvin and Hobbes love.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been pretty amazing for you there, the Bill Watterson exhibition. Like how did that feel to see all that, both being celebrated and by the French, who we attribute to them such levels of great taste that you're like suddenly, yep, all my taste is great, because we all agree. How did you find that?
The Calvin and Hobbes exhibit was spectacular, just like beautifully curated and really like so amazing to not only see the art that he made for the strip, but then also there was a bunch of original art there by his influences, and really like, drawing you in that way of like, here are all the places that came from, and then seeing it and seeing how perfect a lot of it is. Like, I mean, there's something about actually seeing original art that I think prior to this exhibit I just hadn't really understood what that could mean to somebody. Like, similarly, I have been saying recently that I didn't really care much for like technical ability, as I described. Like, I had a lot of bad experiences with it just being something that it was like you had to give up expression in order to have technical ability, and I was never interested. And seeing him being so masterful at all of this, at both the technical side of it, but then this incredible expression, just made me really want to be better at expressing, but like, some kind of balance between those two things, like having enough technical ability that the expression is that much more powerful. It just sort of like, brought this up in me. Same with the Moomin exhibit, actually. I was really blown away by that. And kind of feel like it could only be that way with stuff that's drawn like in a very cartoony style, in a style that you would normally, perhaps as an adult, like not think was meant for you. That like the originals of that kind of artwork that just is very exaggerated and is like maybe fantastical are way more interesting to me than seeing, for example, there was a Taniguchi exhibit as well, and I was just so bored. I'm like, you could have photographed this and I would have had the same impression of it. Like, your talent is obviously remarkable, but it feels like nothing. It feels like I'm looking at just like, it could be a blank gray slab. It would mean the same amount to me. Which isn't to say that he's not like a wonderful artist, just not for me. And so, I mean, I feel like there were so many people there who shared that experience with me, particularly with Bill Watterson. Yeah. So many people there who were having that same, like, walking through the exhibit with like tears in their eyes, just totally feeling themselves expand in all of this, in our understanding of, what he gave us. And whether, the personal elements of the stories or just the dedication that he had, it's just like also there. And then he's funny too. He's like this very, there was an exhibit there, a little part of the display was about his tools, and so he had,
oh god, that was hilarious.
It was amazing. And he's writing like, here's this pen that I use, and here's this other thing I use, and then here's this like measuring tool that you can get very precise with if you want to get like your angles right or whatever. I can't obviously remember what he was saying. It's just too specific, and like clearly I never used that function even once. And this is like, this whiteout is really great when you're like railing towards a deadline, which like all of us are doing, and somehow finding levity in that like pressure that he was feeling all the time. Oh, it blows my mind. And his colors, I just couldn't understand it. So hard to understand that a hand and a human and some, the things that are in front of me at home, like the same sorts of materials produce that. Like, that just, like, reminded me basically of the power that an artist has. Just more profoundly. Like, I sort of hold that as a philosophy in my mind, but like really to understand it, to like feel it. Oh yeah, this is an incredibly powerful thing to be, and it would take me the rest of my life to reach that point, and I'm so interested actually in pursuing it now. But again, like less to have this sort of title of like being an artist, and more to make people feel what I just felt. I was So cool.
No, I know what you mean. Walking around, I actually spend as much time looking at the people as at the works because of what you were saying. There's people tearing up, there's emotional responses, there's a lot of spontaneous laughter happening in the hall as people were actually reading the comics. You know, whether they've read them before or it's fresh, they hit. There was such an engagement. And it was funny because, you know, Bill Watterson was president, was invited to be there and didn't, and yet somehow his work is so potent that even in his absence the connection was so immediate and direct.
Well, it's like he was sort of trying to tell people for so long, like, it's not about me as a person, like, I'm giving you this thing and like that's what you're reacting to. You don't have to make this. And I'm not quoting or paraphrasing him whatsoever. I'm just kind of getting, like, sharing the impression that I got from all of his lack of media interest and the fact that he won't do public appearances and the, like, you know, no interviews thing, like that. Thankfully he broke this year because I'm getting to read an interview he's done with Jenny Robb and just, like, I'm so excited for that. But yeah, it, you know, it just kind of reinforces that point that he's been making this whole time. It's just like, I don't have to be here because this isn't about me. This is the work, and you're experiencing the work. Yeah.
The reason I brought it up, to come back to my original, slightly long-winded question, for which I apologise. What was interesting to read was about how, to get the cartoon syndicated, the strip syndicated originally, he had to fit what was the traditional newspaper format. And over time, you know, he had the clout, but also, I guess, the confidence in his own work to bust out of that, but also to demand that, look, this is what I'm going to do. If this is going to happen, I'm going to do that. And I've noticed in reading the issues of Dumb as they were coming out, I felt that you were breaking out of a layout or a style. Like there was a lot more breakout and playing with format as you went along. And I don't know whether that was just what I was getting from it as a reader or what was your experience as a creator, because the first two seemed to be a little more, not formulaic, but a little more stayed in format. And then suddenly there was a few things where it would really bust out and play with shape and the size and the page. What were you going through? What was your process with that?
Oh, well, that's just... that's actually something that I'm doing... partly to keep myself totally engaged and interested, and it's definitely coming from, like, I definitely am aware of Bill's experience, and how much he played, and, like, seeing that as an example and having studied that, like, I really had the, I guess you could say, like, analytical or academic understanding of comics in my mind of, you know, here are the rules, you decide what they are at the beginning, and then you can break them. But luckily not, like, you know, in Watterson's case, they were coming from the restrictions of the newspapers and having to shift and move content all the time and basically being controlled by those things as opposed to having any artistic freedom. And then for me it was more just like, you know, people are going to expect a certain thing, and I think that I'm more interested in pushing this medium to see, like, how far I can wiggle around in here just to make a story as clear and as affecting as possible. Like, you know, I basically had to do the first issue with more rigidity just to set up your expectations, and then I could break them as much as I wanted.
Yeah.
And that would mean, because I set up your expectation to be one thing, that when I break it, like, you know, I'm doing it for a reason, and you know that I have somewhere to come back to when I'm done. And all of it has purpose. Like, it's not, I'm not just conforming to a grid that exists because it was easier, because it was there. Like, it's all with the intention of making each story as clear and as, like, strong on its own as it can be. Yeah, I guess that's the best way I can describe it. I've been told I'm you know, a formalist, and I'm, like, a high concept art person. So, you know, those are true. I'm definitely doing both of those things. I just like to keep the labels kind of minimal in maintaining an accessibility to the work as well.
No, I wasn't sure how much any of that might have been dictated by format as well, in terms of how you were at first expecting to deliver the comic, whether you were seeing it as being a printed artifact and then going, well, there are kind of certain limitations or preconceptions that you have where you might feel you have limitations even if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, for example, I read them digitally, and so when I saw things exploding out a bit more on the page, I was going, oh, I wonder how you deliver these in print. And so I was curious as to how the format was also affecting your choices as to whether, you were... I really don't know.
Yeah. Well, if I'd ever thought about it as a purely digital thing, it would be extremely different. Because that is a different format, and that should dictate how you produce and how you lay things out. Like, no, I've been obsessed with books since I was a kid, and I have been in publishing for quite a long time, so I was mentioning my sort of, like, ridiculous standards of printing earlier, and I still will always think of projects as a print project first.
Mm-hmm.
There's one sort of exception in these short stories that I'm writing for a website called The Hairpin right now, which are very... I'm aware that they're going digital first, so I make them in such a way that they can be either one, but the final product that I will produce before I get to a printed product is going digital.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm aware of how they need to be more modular. But generally everything I do is always going to be for print just because that's what I love. And yes, it affects the decisions that I make when I'm telling the story, but like I'm very happy about that. Like I'm happy for those constraints because they're aligning with all of these other beautiful book objects that I've seen in the past that have meant so much to me. So I'm still just like, willingly walking into this particular set of circumstances, and then obviously I can play in there as much as I want. I know what I'm doing. Yeah, and I think it's always going to be that way. Like I don't have much interest in the infinite canvas or the endless scrolling. Like it just doesn't mean as much to me, except for in one. There's really one case in which I think that digital performs better for showcasing the real beauty of a work, and that is watercolor becomes totally luminous in a way that on a page. It's still beautiful and it's still totally alive, but with the backlit, beautiful white light coming through it, it's just stunning. Like, there was a Brecht Evans book that I read first called Night Animals. I read it first digitally, and then I saw it in paper, and the paper just did not measure up. It was this, gorgeous glowing story before, and then it turned kind of flat, and I was upset.
I was quite excited when I was reading the book and seeing that you're a print lover, like because of not being able to speak all the time, you go back to the basics of pen and paper, but I think you sort of express a level of excitement in that situation, in that, well, hey, I really love the tactile pen and paper experience. So while it's not ideal and you would like to speak, coming back to that is great. And I always like to do that. I mean, I've got terribly scrawled notes here today, and I usually have my very special notepads that I write in, and there's nothing like that. So yeah, I was expecting that you would sort of be doing it for the print because there is that tactile nature.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm glad that comes through, just because that's an element of my personality too. So I'm portraying myself accurately if I'm showing those things off.
And it's a really kind of hackneyed cliche and a horrible thing to say, and people are always like, you never ask about this, but I think in this case it's relevant. They talk about finding your voice as a creator, and yeah, that's a horrible thing these days, but because of the nature of your book and the fact that it's kind of about losing your voice, and in many ways the expression of that helps you to find your voice again. Do you feel that's the case? I mean, is that a kind of correlation that you've made as well? Yeah, it is. I'm actually not going to be able to fully answer this question because that would spoil something. But what I can say is that, for example, the feminist question we were talking about earlier, and my decisions around learning about it to decide what my beliefs and my convictions are, I consider that in itself a form of finding my voice, because it was
going from sort of a muddy, like, sound of, like, I don't know, to, like, I know, I can speak clearly about this thing now. I'm sure of how I feel, and that's a part of my identity. I'm sure of that. Like, for me, that's what that means. And that's one thing that means. And then you can consider that just, take out the subject matter of feminism and put in anything else. Like, I've had a lot of other instances of, like, finding my voice in that way. But I'm going to leave it there because there's too much about that coming in the last issues.
I don't want to spoil any of that. It's more...
It'll be more fun to read anyway. Talk about it.
Wow, and I guess the other interesting thing is when you discuss a work in progress, it's always fun then to revisit as a complete work and talk again.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to know how your impression of what I'm about to do gets changed, like either validated or surprised by what you read in the end.
Yeah, I look forward to that as well. Now, I've taken up a lot of your time and, more importantly, a lot of your voice today, and so I appreciate you sacrificing in that way. But one thing I did want to ask to finish, you talked about some of your influences as far as Bill Watterson, Julie Doucet, etc. What about current influences and people that are having an impact on you now? Like, are there people that you've discovered that, it could be older stuff that suddenly is fresh and new to you, or new stuff that's really speaking to you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, because I'm reading a lot, and I mean, particularly right now, I read a lot of things that are French. In fact, because I'm still sort of teaching myself. Like, I'm quite comfortable in French, but you have to sort of stay immersed, and still many words that I just haven't come across yet. I have to keep doing that.
Yeah.
And I mean, some creators are not even available in English, so I have this benefit of exploring new things. Problem is, I'm quite bad at coming up with examples on the spot of almost anything. So to give you some names, like, that would be very difficult. But yeah, there are some people in my life who are quite strong influences that I think the things that we share are sort of more like, like our sort of philosophies about making comics. Like, we're not necessarily aesthetically aligned as much, but, like, definitely choosing expressiveness and choosing, like, emotional stories and choosing things that have, like, political value explicitly, because I'm of the belief that everything is political. Whether you accept that or not is up to you, but I'm certainly more interested in things that acknowledge it and, like, use that. And so, like, yeah, to sort of rattle off some names, like, I really love Laura Netzger and Sophie Yano and Kathy G. Johnson, and Dash Shaw actually is doing some really interesting stuff. And recently I sort of lost track of his work for a while, and then come back around to thinking that I'm just fascinated by whatever he's going to do next. Like, he's always got something crazy coming up. Joseph Lambert obviously is a mega genius, and, like, also is one of the people who really has an incredible technical ability and is also pushing for everything to be expanded, for our definitions of comics to be expanded and to see, like, what they can really do. I'm scared to list any more names. I just feel like I'm leaving too many people out.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable, but starting with those people then would hopefully lead you to the other people who are of a similar ilk, and you can just explore from there.
And if people are more interested in exploring your work, being able to look it up and to read both the new comics as well as to continue following the Dumb Project, where do they go for those things?
Well, it's unique enough that you can pretty much just Google my name and the word dumb and you'll get there. But the project's website is called georgiasdumbproject.com, because there's a little more than just comics on there now, and hopefully quite a bit more coming soon. So, yeah.
And the hairpin is just thehairpin.com?
Thehairpin.com, yeah. And if you go there and you're looking for my work, searching my name is the easiest way. Sometimes searching the titles of things that I've done don't bring up the comics, but yeah, you should be able to find it there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking time with us today, Georgia. I appreciate being able to learn more about this
Thank you. Yeah.
Broaden some comics of my own.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the time. Yeah.
Alright, so I'm here with Simon Hacking and Tom Oldham, two of our Orbital alumni, who are now on to bigger, I don't want to say better things, because I quite like the shop, but sure, bigger things. And certainly what you guys are able to do now is better with Breakdown Press.
Sure, so I mean, we set Breakdown Press up maybe 3 years ago now, something like that, and had like one book out. And then a year after that we had 4 books out, and now a year later we've got about 11. And so it's kind of expanded quite a lot in the last couple of years. We are, if you're not familiar with our work, we do kind of like, I don't know, alternative art comics, that kind of stuff, but with quite a strong focus on narrative. So it's not all kind of, or I would call it like, a lot of it is experimental, but it's all in a narrative way. So it's all
there's a strong there's an avant-garde vibe about the line. But as Simon says, there's good stories, good comics, good stories.
Yeah. Well, I guess talking about you guys starting it and saying now you're up to 11 books.
Don't hold me to that as well. I'm pretty sure it's 11.
Yeah.
But if it's 12 or 10,
people can see if they can collect them all.
Exactly.
And send us the answer and say, no, you've got 12 books and I own them all.
Exactly.
But considering what you guys have put out so far, was it what you expected to be doing from the beginning? So when you started it, obviously there was Joe Kessler's Windowpane to start. Did you kind of expect that the 11 books, or however many you have now, would be these ones?
To a certain extent. I mean, no, in the sense that like some of the guys we're working with, we weren't even familiar with when we started working, or when we started Breakdown. Some stuff like the manga line that we've been working on, so we published a bunch of reprints of stuff from the 50s, 60s, 70s, from Japan by guys like Seiichi Hayashi, who we're like massive fans of, and so it's incredible to work with him, and that's something I certainly never would have predicted 3 years ago. But no, in terms of the content and the kind of look of the books, we're very proud of the books we put out, and certainly it is the aesthetic we were going for when we first started.
Yeah, when there is an element of when if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
So we've created opportunities by putting people's work out there, other people who feel a certain kinship or have sort of come to us, and
the reaction we've had to the books has been really exciting and kind of gratifying to us. Get like Tom says, you do get people whose work you admire coming up to you and saying like, I love your stuff, I'd love to work with you, kind of thing, which is amazing. That's all you can kind of hope for.
Yeah, and obviously the line is only as good as the artists that work with it and work within it. So we're really happy to be working with such talented cartoonists.
How are you finding balancing the curated content? Because I guess that you guys would be at first, picking just people that you really like and whose work you want to push, but then you'll be having other people come to you, and it's not necessarily that you don't like their work at all. I don't mean that, but how do you balance that commercial consideration with what you
This is, like Tom was saying, this is part of the ethos from the very beginning has been to only publish work that we really love. And so it hasn't been particularly difficult or complicated to dig out stuff that we really love. But every single book that we've done, we're proud of. So at no point have we sacrificed quality for kind of commercial considerations. And also, like, we haven't been really going long enough for that to be a particular kind of concern. But one of the things we're most proud of with our line is that we think every book stands up to each other, kind of thing.
There's an element that some books might have more commercial potential than others. But again, part of what we're hoping to do is build an audience for comics in general, but specifically the sort of comics cartoonists and artists that we work with. So whilst we're very happy if something has like a lot of commercial potential, because we want our cartoonists to make a living out of being cartoonists.
Yep.
At the same time, we're keen to help build an audience that can make a book commercially successful as well alongside. And we do that through like running events like Safari Festival, and also trying to find new venues to stock our books. Like record stores and stuff like that, but also coming to events like this, Angoulême, to try and reach as wide a audience as potentially possible.
Yeah. Now, since you mentioned Angoulême, you guys are actually set up here. I'm speaking with you inside your store, which is, impressive. It's
modest,
very
but impressive.
It's impressive. I like that I know people who have stands here. That's fantastic. How have you guys actually found the festival from this side of the table now?
It's great. It's really good fun to be able to put the books in the hands of people who can't get them easily otherwise. Like, we sell through our online store, we sell to France reasonably often, but this is actually the first time we've been at a stall in France. We've done loads of festivals in the States and in the UK and stuff like that, but it's great to be able to finally put these kind of books in the hands of people who haven't been able to get them previously.
Yeah.
And also, this hasn't necessarily surprised me, but it's been like a pleasure to be able to meet a lot of artists who we like and talk about doing books with them, and talk to foreign publishers about rights and to books and stuff like that. So it's more than just selling books, and also we just met loads of people that we know that we hadn't
should
met
be fun
as well.
Working comics, one of the nice things about it is it's fun, and you get to hang out with fun people and get drunk with fun people, or have a nice meal with fun people, and that's the big takeaway. It's interesting. Comics culture in France is interesting because there is a bigger market and there is a different culture around it. The ninth art and all that sort of stuff. It's very interesting seeing the French mainstream, which is a certain type of books, like especially genre albums and stuff.
I think yesterday when I saw you very neatly summed up the genres here. Yes.
Cowboys and tits.
I felt really guilty. I'll tell you now, because I was carrying my bag with Crepax and volumes of Blueberry, and I'm kind of like,
no.
It's all
Crepax and
all
Mobius
good
is fine.
Yeah,
I don't think that's quite what we're talking about.
But there's also but there's also this very vibrant and large, though contextually still smaller, sort of the independent publishers from Association down, and it's interesting being exposed to that, seeing how the French market deals with certain issues and what works for them in terms of selling interesting comics.
It's nice speaking to all the other publishers as well. It's just easier you have the context to do that if you're already set up with a stand. But it's been great hanging out with the guys from L'Emploi de Moi, who are a Belgian publisher, who they did the French edition of Mutiny Bay, which is one of our books, by Antoine Cosset, who is he's Parisian originally, but we met him living in London. He studied in London. Anyway, so being able to hang out with those guys has been really interesting to see how they work. They've been going for their 15th anniversary this year, so they've got a big exhibition as part of the festival, and it's cool to see how a publisher with a similar aesthetic to us, who's kind of come up in a similar way to us, can be a legitimate thing after 15 years of, and can keep it going for that long.
It's nice, because Antoine's here with them, with the French edition of Mutiny Bay, and we've got Lando, who did Gardens of Glass, our other sort of big book, and he's over in the FOF festival, so it's been nice having those guys hanging around.
There's those guys like hanging out with Simon Hanselman, who we met in New York a few years ago, but haven't seen since. He's here with his French publisher and his Spanish publisher, and so it's been cool hanging out with him. We met Mikkel Sommer, who's he's done quite a lot. He's done books for like Casterman and stuff in France, but I think Nobrow are the only people who've published him in English before. But meeting him, he's a like incredibly nice guy, so that was really cool.
Hyperactive dude.
Yeah, he really goes for it. Yeah. Among many other people who we've met.
There's a big Brit contingent over here.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of Brits. It was cool hanging out with Luke Pearson for a bit. I don't see him very often. Like Isabel Greenberg's floating around, Stephen Collins, all those guys. So it's cool. It's nice to go to a festival that's reasonably near to home as well, rather than ones in the States where it's kind of you're the sole representatives of your country.
So how much are you guys actually trying to source talent here as well? Like, are you either looking at doing the English language versions of certain things that you've discovered, or even sort of breaking cartoonists that perhaps haven't been published by anyone yet?
It depends on the project and the person, Some people we've met who are kind of self-publishing work, whose work we really like, who we're going to speak to maybe about doing stuff. Some people, there are existing editions of their work, so we speak to the publisher. It kind of completely depends on the project.
But yeah, we've certainly been shopping around and
Yes.
seeing if there's any work that excites us, and trying to put the cartoonists we work with in the hands of publishers over here.
Yeah.
And there's people seem really excited by, people really like Gardens of Glass by Lando and some of the other Risograph books. So it's exciting to do all that stuff. It's fun.
So it's scouting as much as being here selling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But and also because you can plan to go and like say hi to certain artists you like and stuff like that. But it's actually the people you meet who you've never heard of, or the people who you didn't even know were going to be here, who you bump into at the bar kind of thing. It's that unpredictability that makes it totally worth coming.
Yeah.
You can send an email to someone you've heard of, but you can't send an email to someone you're going to meet in a bar who you've never heard of, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's kind of another really important part of actually coming out to these festivals, and
you actually discover stuff
Yeah.
that you're not going to find otherwise.
Exactly.
And in the perfect surroundings.
Yeah.
Ideally drunk, or at least somewhat
usually
inebriated.
somewhat inebriated. Yeah.
And you mentioned before about your own festival. You did Safari. So how did that go this year?
Great, yeah. I mean, it's the first time we've run a festival. The feedback was really good. People seem to sell books, which is cool. We tried to make it like as simple as possible for people to turn up, sell books in an environment where it was easy for the public to come in and see and buy stuff, and they were in a context where they might be interested in seeing the other work that was on show and that kind of thing. And on all those counts, it seemed to go very well. But we are intending to do more in the future, certainly.
That was my next question, yeah.
And expanding it in certain ways.
Yeah, we don't want to lose the atmosphere that we built with the first year, which seemed to be really friendly, and people actually managed to sell work. So we're hoping to keep that, but maybe add a few more tables, bring in some more people from Europe.
That's something else we've been doing here, is speaking to people about coming over for Safari.
Yeah, possibly add some talk elements to it, and
exhibitions, more music stuff, maybe.
Both comics and fine arts, crossover exhibitions, and the music program as well. Expand that a little bit, but still always keeping the focus on comics. Comics.
And talking about your comics, then, so regardless of how many titles are currently out, what do we have coming up? Like, is there stuff that you've already got announced that's to be expected?
Some
soon?
stuff we would. The next thing will be the next manga translation, which is by a guy called Sasaki Maki, who used to do stuff for Garo in the 60s and 70s. It's kind of weirder and more psychedelic than the Hayashi stuff, and we're doing, rather than a risograph book, that's going to be like a 200-page kind of graphic novel format thing, and that works really great, and I think a lot of people are going to be pretty impressed by it. It's really crazy stuff that I certainly hadn't seen until. So Ryan Holmberg is the guy that edits our manga line and does the translations and the essays and this kind of stuff, and he introduced us to it, and we were kind of blown away. So that's going to be a really cool one. Also,
then we've got the Shaky Kane collection,
which
is collecting all of his strips from Deadline, all the Amen stuff. That's been out of print for the better part of 20 years, maybe even longer now, in 2015. So that'll be fun getting that out. It's good. We've got David Quantick and Frank Santoro have written forwards and afterwards for it, and Shaky's annotated all the strips, because a lot of for those who aren't familiar with Shaky Kane's work, most recently he was doing Bulletproof Coffin and a series of one-shots. He does Elephant Men occasionally for Image Comics. It's sort of I think calling it a Jack Kirby pastiche is unfair in a lot of ways, because it's sort of but there is that element to it. There is that sort of Silver Age superhero comics element to it, but it also possesses that sort of dynamism and excitement, and it's overused words like surrealism and psychedelic can be peppered on it. It's really great stuff. But this stuff, as well as just being sort of ripping yarns of weirdness, there's also elements of politicized elements and stuff like that that Shaky needed to annotate some of the strips a little bit, because There's stuff referring to current events in the 90s and stuff like that. But yeah, so it's a nice expanded edition, and that should be with us before the summer.
And then we've got more of the risograph stuff. So Antoine Cossé is working on a new thing that's maybe 40, 50 pages, new risograph book. Windowpane 3 ought to be out sometime in 2015. Treasure Island 3, which is the continuation of Connor Williamson's book. A number of other things that we're kind of talking with people about now, and with people that we've worked with in the past as well. But there should be plenty more.
Busy.
Yeah. So, without getting ahead of ourselves, do you expect to be back here next year in Angoulême?
We'd love to. Yeah. It's been really good fun.
So I would imagine that by that point we'll be talking about 20 books or something like that.
Who knows? Who knows? No, it's fun.
Well, thank you very much, Simon and Tom,
No
for
problem.
taking a bit of time with
Thank
me.
you.
And,
No, not at
yes, I'm sure I will see you again soon.
Indeed.
Brilliant.